In the darkest corners of royal history, some rulers were feared not for their power, but for their madness. One king consumed by paranoia and rage crossed a line no father ever should he murdered his own son. This isn't fiction. It's a true story buried in blood-soaked chronicles and whispered through centuries. Watch until the end to uncover the chilling truth behind this unthinkable act, and decide for yourself, was he insane or purely evil? But before we descend into the madness, click like and subscribe to join history's hidden horrors, where the past never rests in peace. In the darkest pages of Russia's chronicles, his name still curdles blood. Ivan IV Vasilievich, crowned at 16, feared as Tsar of All Rus, remembered by eternity as Ivan the Terrible. Some called him God's chosen hammer, others called him the devil's own heir. But within the silence of cathedral stone, on that winter morning of his coronation, he was simply a boy with haunted eyes, kneeling before a gilded altar that would seal his fate. Candles flickered around him like pale souls, their trembling flames casting shadows across the trembling priests. The chants rose, echoing off marble pillars blackened with centuries of smoke. And as the monomach's cap, heavy with gold fur and jewels, descended onto his bowed head, witnesses swore he shivered, not from cold, but from an ecstasy that burned through every nerve, carving its mark upon him forever. He rose then, a Tsar, in the eyes of heaven and earth. The bells thundered their iron voices across Moscow, shaking frost from palace eaves, stirring wolves from the distant forests. Yet within his chest, something cold spread its roots. Power was meant to be warmth, he thought, safety, victory. But all he felt was emptiness. That night, Ivan lay awake on silken furs, eyes open to dark rafters, alive with unseen scuttling. Breath shallow, he felt truth uncoil inside him. He was alone, utterly. His mother had died when he was just 8, poisoned by men who now bowed before him. His father's death had left him prey to boyars who beat him like a dog, dragging him across icy floors by his hair, his ribs bruising on stone. Now those same men knelt, kissed his robes, called him Tsar. But in their trembling he saw no love, only terror, and behind terror, ambition. By dawn, he ordered new decrees carved into oak and sent across Russia like lashes of a whip. Boyars who defied him vanished. Priests who questioned him wept blood under his stare. Foreign ambassadors bowed so low their foreheads bruised on frozen marble. Ivan walked among them with silent, measured steps, each heel strike ringing like a funeral bell down Kremlin halls. But the cracks had already formed. Late at night, in chambers lit only by a dying candle, he heard whispers slithering between shadows. Sometimes he woke, gagging, tasting blood from screams he hadn't realized tore his throat. Shapes flickered just beyond sight. A woman burned for witchcraft mouth, frozen in black agony. A soldier he'd flayed alive, skinless arms, raised as if still pleading. Blink, and they were gone, leaving only the scent of scorched flesh coiling in the candlelit dark. During morning councils, his eyes burned with a brilliance that curdled stomachs. Courtiers felt something twist inside them when he gazed too long, as if he saw not merely their trembling faces, but every betrayal ever conceived in the damp labyrinths of their hearts. Once a boyar fainted under his stare, collapsing with a wet crack of skull on stone tiles. Ivan barely blinked. In these early years, he built cathedrals that clawed heaven, reformed Russia's broken state, and carved his name across conquered lands in letters of iron and blood. Yet each triumph only deepened the madness fermenting in his veins. Power was no longer a crown. It became a worm, gnawing his mind from within. At dawn, he knelt alone before the Virgin's icon, tears dripping from his beard onto polished stone floors. "Forgive me," he whispered, though no sin had yet been spoken. "Forgive me for what I am becoming, for what you made me, for what I must do to remain Tsar." Outside winter coiled the land in silent death. The Moscow River froze solid wolves crossing under moonlight, their shadows slipping across palace walls like fleeting curses. Ivan watched them from high windows, unblinking his breath, fogging the frost-bitten glass. He thought of the endless forests beyond, dark cathedrals of pine and fir, silent under black skies. Within them lay secrets, buried bones, exiled monks clawing caves from permafrost, and corpses gnawed by wolves until nothing remained but glistening ribs beneath cold stars. And he thought, all this is mine. Then another truth slithered colder. No, I belong to all this. For even a Tsar, crowned by God and feared by men, was only a body waiting to be swallowed by Russian earth. Already the voices whispered in the hollows of his ribs. Already he saw the blood that would flow from his own seed, blood that would mark his soul for eternity. As dawn bled across Moscow's gilded domes, its pale light touched the iron staff beside his throne, the staff that would in time split his kingdom's future open like a skull. In the darkest pages of Russia's chronicles, his name still curdles blood. Ivan IV Vasilyevich, crowned at 16, feared as Tsar of All Rus, remembered by eternity as Ivan the Terrible. Some called him God's chosen hammer, others called him the devil's own heir. But within the silence of cathedral stone, on that winter morning of his coronation, he was simply a boy with haunted eyes, kneeling before a gilded altar that would seal his fate. Candles flickered around him like pale souls, their trembling flames casting shadows across the trembling priests. The chants rose, echoing off marble pillars blackened with centuries of smoke. And as the monomach's cap, heavy with gold fur and jewels, descended onto his bowed head, witnesses swore he shivered, not from cold, but from an ecstasy that burned through every nerve, carving its mark upon him forever. He rose then, a Tsar, in the eyes of heaven and earth. The bells thundered their iron voices across Moscow, shaking frost from palace eaves, stirring wolves from the distant forests. Yet within his chest, something cold spread its roots. Power was meant to be warmth, he thought, safety, victory. But all he felt was emptiness. That night, Ivan lay awake on silken furs, eyes open to dark rafters, alive with unseen scuttling. Breath shallow, he felt truth uncoil inside him. He was alone, utterly. His mother had died when he was just 8, poisoned by men who now bowed before him. His father's death had left him prey to boyars who beat him like a dog, dragging him across icy floors by his hair, his ribs bruising on stone. Now those same men knelt, kissed his robes, called him Tsar. But in their trembling, he saw no love, only terror. And behind terror, ambition. By dawn, he ordered new decrees carved into oak and sent across Russia like lashes of a whip. Boyars who defied him vanished. Priests who questioned him wept blood under his stare. Foreign ambassadors bowed so low their foreheads bruised on frozen marble. Ivan walked among them with silent measured steps, each heel strike ringing like a funeral bell down Kremlin halls. But the cracks had already formed. Late at night, in chambers lit only by a dying candle, he heard whispers slithering between shadows. Sometimes he woke, gagging, tasting blood from screams he hadn't realized tore his throat. Shapes flickered just beyond sight. A woman burned for witchcraft mouth, frozen in black agony. A soldier he'd flayed alive, skinless arms, raised as if still pleading. Blink, and they were gone, leaving only the scent of scorched flesh coiling in the candlelit dark. During morning councils, his eyes burned with a brilliance that curdled stomachs. Courtiers felt something twist inside them when he gazed too long, as if he saw not merely their trembling faces, but every betrayal ever conceived in the damp labyrinths of their hearts. Once a boyar fainted under his stare, collapsing with a wet crack of skull on stone tiles. Ivan barely blinked. In these early years, he built cathedrals that clawed heaven, reformed Russia's broken state, and carved his name across conquered lands in letters of iron and blood. Yet each triumph only deepened the madness fermenting in his veins. Power was no longer a crown. It became a worm, gnawing his mind from within. At dawn, he knelt alone before the Virgin's icon, tears dripping from his beard onto polished stone floors. "Forgive me," he whispered, though no sin had yet been spoken. "Forgive me for what I am becoming, for what you made me, for what I must do to remain Tsar." Outside, winter coiled the land in silent death. The Moscow River froze solid wolves crossing under moonlight, their shadows slipping across palace walls like fleeting curses. Ivan watched them from high windows, unblinking his breath, fogging the frost-bitten glass. He thought of the endless forests beyond, dark cathedrals of pine and fir, silent under black skies. Within them lay secrets, buried bones, exiled monks clawing caves from permafrost, and corpses gnawed by wolves until nothing remained but glistening ribs beneath cold stars. And he thought, all this is mine. Then another truth slithered colder. No, I belong to all this. For even a Tsar, crowned by God and feared by men, was only a body waiting to be swallowed by Russian earth. Already the voices whispered in the hollows of his ribs. Already he saw the blood that would flow from his own seed, blood that would mark his soul for eternity. As dawn bled across Moscow's gilded domes, its pale light touched the iron staff beside his throne, the staff that would in time split his kingdom's future open like a skull. Years passed, and Ivan the Terrible's reign bled deeper into the bones of Russia. Where his iron shadow fell, monasteries rose, boyars knelt, and traitors dangled from blackened gallows. But within his fortress palaces of white stone and gilded icons, another life was blooming his son Tsarevich Ivan Ivanovich. From infancy, the boy had eyes like dark amber, eyes that did not flinch before the Tsar. As a child, he walked through Kremlin corridors with quiet confidence, trailing priests and scribes with solemn dignity, already bearing the gravity of a ruler. His tutors praised his Latin recitations, his theological debates, his skill with sword and horse. When he turned 14, the boyars whispered to each other in trembling relief, "If God takes the father, at least Russia will not fall to ruin. This son is strong. This son is sane." But for Ivan the Terrible, each praise for his son felt like a nail driven into his own decaying throne. He watched the boy spar in the snow-covered training yard, the blade gleaming in morning light as the Tsarevich disarmed his tutor with effortless grace. Around them, guards clapped polite approval, snow drifting down onto fur hats and iron helmets. Only the father sat silent, his eyes black pits beneath his sable crown. That evening, in a vaulted dining hall lit by trembling tallow candles, Ivan called his son to sit beside him. The Tsarevich obeyed without hesitation. His youthful face composed the thin scar along his jaw, catching firelight like a silver thread. "You fought well today," the Tsar said softly, his voice like rusted iron scraping stone. Servants froze mid-pour. The prince bowed his head in gratitude. "Thank you, father. I seek only to serve you and Russia." Ivan watched his son's hands, strong, unblemished, with the thickening knuckles of a swordsman. The same hands that in time would wield the scepter he now clutched with whitening fingers. He saw the flush of health in the boy's cheeks, the way his gaze did not tremble or shift. For a moment, love pierced the Tsar's ruined heart, fierce, agonizing love that felt like a blade twisting under his ribs. But love is kin to fear, and Ivan's fear was a black sea with no shore. In that quiet hall filled with the smell of wax and roast goose, he saw his own death flicker behind his son's steady eyes. He saw himself cold in the cathedral beard, combed with oils, hands folded over his rotting chest. And above him, the Tsarevich, crowned as Tsar Russia, roaring with relief. "He wants me gone," whispered the worm within his mind. "He counts your heartbeats. He counts your breaths." The prince excused himself after the meal to join his young wife Yelena in evening prayers. Ivan watched him go, the fine gold embroidery of his robes catching candlelight, like molten sun. Servants hurried to clear dishes, trembling under the silence that followed. The Tsar sat unmoving, breathing slow fingers, drumming against his iron staff. In the shadows behind him, a chained bear whimpered. Ivan had ordered the beast captured in Karelia's forests brought to Moscow as a spectacle. Now it huddled in its cage of black bars, massive paws covering its muzzle. Ivan rose and walked to it, the echo of his boots ringing off marble floors. "Look at me," he hissed. The bear raised its eyes, dark pools glistening with dumb terror. Ivan reached between the bars, stroking its coarse fur with trembling fingers. "You know," he whispered one day, "he will put me in a cage. Like this." The bear whimpered again, breath steaming in the cold hall. Ivan pressed his forehead to the iron bars until pain burned between his brows. Then he turned away, robes whispering across the floor like distant thunder. That night, sleep would not take him. Lying beside his silent wife, he stared into the carved wooden ceiling where demons snarled amid acanthus vines and angels wept molten tears. His breath came ragged chest hitching with thoughts he could not quiet. "He is my son. He is my blood, my flesh, my immortality." But another voice rose within sharper than prayer. "He is your replacement, your death, your final shame." Outside, moonlight silvered the frozen courtyards. Wolves prowled beyond the Kremlin walls, their howls breaking against stone towers like mournful prayers. In his chamber, Ivan felt sweat freeze along his spine. He closed his eyes and saw not the Virgin, not Christ, but his son's face, calm, fearless, crowned with light. And beneath that golden glow, he saw himself reflected, old, broken, shrunken in his throne, nothing more than a shadow cast by the boy who would soon eclipse him. The iron staff stood beside his bed, silent and cold. His fingers twitched toward it in the dark. Winter tightened its claws around Moscow, snow piling against cathedral doors, chimneys coughing black smoke into leaden skies. Inside the Kremlin's labyrinth of chambers, warmth reeked of rancid, tallow-wet furs and unwashed fear. Courtiers huddled in alcoves, whispering behind embroidered sleeves, their breath frosting in the dim torchlight. They had learned the Tsar's mind was a tundra, where words froze and shattered. Yet some words were crafted to cut before they froze. "Your Majesty," murmured Afanasy Vyazemsky, his thin lips glistening with fear as he bowed low before Ivan's throne. "Forgive my trembling tongue, but the prince grows impatient to serve." Ivan's gaze flickered from the flickering iron lamp to Vyazemsky's quivering eyes. "Speak plainly, worm." The court fell silent. The chains of the bear clinked in a far corner. Vyazemsky swallowed Adam's apple, bobbing like a drowning man's last breath. He has gathered boyars loyal to him. I have heard, forgive me, that they discuss when Russia might need a younger, stronger Tsar. Silence swelled until it roared in Ivan's skull. The torch flames blurred into writhing serpents. Slowly he rose from the throne, the iron staff scraping against stone tiles. He walked down the dais steps, robes trailing behind like black water. Vyazemsky fell prostrate at his feet, forehead pressed to freezing stone. "Look at me," Ivan rasped. The court watched without breath. The boyars knew what happened when the Tsar's voice dropped to such quiet darkness. Vyazemsky raised his head, eyes wild with terror. "You heard this with your own ears?" Ivan asked gently, almost tenderly. "Yes, Batyushka Tsar. I heard it in the prince's antechamber. They spoke of the realm's need for youth, for certainty." Ivan's lips twitched into something like a smile. He turned, pacing slowly down the hall staff, tapping in rhythmic threat. The servants scattered before him, robes and skirts hissing against stone. Youth, certainty. Words that once described him when he crushed Kazan beneath Russian boots, when Orthodox priests anointed him conqueror of all Tartary. But now they whispered it about his son, with his unlined brow and unshaking hands. Behind Ivan, the court remained prostrate. The bear whined from its cage. He turned back and gestured to the guards. "Take him," Vyazemsky screamed as iron fists hauled him upright. "Mercy, Batyushka, mercy, I only serve you. You have served me," Ivan said softly. "Now you will serve Russia with your silence." They dragged him from the hall, his screams echoing down cold corridors until they fell silent in the dungeons below. Ivan returned to his throne. The staff clicked against stone as he climbed the dais. The boyars rose in trembling unison, their foreheads raw with frostburn from the floor. That evening, Ivan summoned his priests. They came bearing icons and incense, hoping he sought confession or prayer. Instead, he demanded divination. They opened their leather-bound books, fingers trembling over psalms and curses, reading omens in candle flickers and smoldering myrrh. One priest, old and near blind, croaked out a single word: treachery. Ivan stared into the icon of the Virgin Hodegetria, her dark eyes endless with sorrow. "Who," he asked, "the Mother of God? Who betrays me?" The priests fell silent. Only the crackle of resin in the brazier answered. Ivan's chest heaved with each breath. Sweat rolled down his temples, stinging his eyes with salt. Within the wavering candlelight, the painted Virgin seemed to move her gaze, flicking away from him, toward the shadows behind. He turned. In his mind's eye, he saw his son standing in that darkness, sword-bared eyes glowing with holy certainty. The Tsarevich, young, righteous beloved. Everything Ivan no longer was. The priests began chanting hymns to calm him, but their voices trembled like dying reeds. Ivan rose from his knees, sweeping past them, the scent of burning resin curling through his beard. He walked through silent corridors, lit only by wavering rush lamps, past guards who dropped to one knee without meeting his eyes. In his bedchamber, he found his iron staff waiting beside the icon of Christ Pantocrator. Its black shaft gleamed in the torchlight, the engraved silver bands catching the glow like lightning trapped in iron. He ran his hand along it, feeling each ridge, each notch carved in old campaigns. Outside, the snow fell without sound, blanketing the world in false peace. But within Ivan's skull, thoughts raged like wolves. His heart beat to a single rhythm, pulsing louder with every breath. "He will take your throne. He will take your throne. He will take your throne." He closed his eyes and saw the boy again. Strong hands gripping the scepter head bowed in solemn coronation, Russia roaring its approval. In that vision, the old Tsar was gone, erased like dust brushed from marble. Ivan gripped the staff tighter. The voices within him quieted, replaced by a cold certainty, deeper than prayer. If betrayal had rooted itself in his son, it must be burned out before it flowered. For Russia, for God, for himself. He breathed slowly, the iron cold biting into his palms. The hour of mercy had ended. The hour of righteous wrath had come. The winter night pressed against the Kremlin walls, black and silent, as if the world itself held its breath. In Ivan's private chamber, torches hissed against the damp chill, their flames writhing in unseen drafts. The Tsar paced before the hearthrobes, trailing across stone iron staff clutched in trembling fingers. His breath misted the air, each exhale ragged with a rhythm not quite sane. Outside, wolves howled beyond the frozen river. Their cries curled through arrow slits and echoed in the hollow of his chest. They call for death, he thought. They call for blood. There was a knock at the heavy oak door. It opened, and the Tsarevich entered, his youthful face, grave in the wavering light. He bowed low. "Father, you summoned me." Ivan turned to face him. The boy's silhouette glowed with torchlight, casting long shadows across frescoes of saints and martyrs. In that flickering brilliance, he looked crowned already, as though God himself had lit a halo above his dark hair. For a moment, love rose in Ivan, like blood from a wound. He saw his son, as he was as a child, clutching a carved wooden horse, eyes wide with pride at a father's praise. But memory twisted, and now Ivan saw only a rival, young, unbroken, fearless. I hear Ivan's whispered voice, trembling with the hush of approaching doom that you plot against me. The Tsarevich raised his eyes, astonished. Father, no. I would never. Lies. The word ripped from Ivan's throat like vomit. He stepped forward, staff clanging against stone tiles. I hear you gather boyars. I hear you spread rumors of my weakness. I hear you count the days until my corpse feeds the worms. The boy fell to his knees, arms outstretched. Tears welled in his eyes, not of guilt, but of terror and grief. Batyushka Tsar, my father, I serve only you. Russia is nothing without you. I am nothing without you. But the words melted before they reached Ivan's ears. Madness raged in him now, black and blinding, drowning the boy's pleas in an ocean of remembered humiliations, betrayals and beatings that had shaped his soul into something twisted, beyond mending. He saw boyars dragging his childhood self across frozen halls by his hair. He saw their boots crush his ribs. He saw their laughter. And now, in his son's tearful eyes, he saw every sneer ever carved into his heart. With a howl that shook the icons on the walls, Ivan raised the iron staff high above his head. The Tsarevich gasped, eyes widening with a terror so pure it froze time itself. Forgive me, Ivan sobbed, voice breaking like rotten timber. Forgive me, my son. And he brought the staff down with all the force of his rage, grief and dying sanity. The crack echoed through the chamber like God's own thunder. Bone split. Blood sprayed across his boots, warm and thick. The Tsarevich collapsed to the stone floor, his skull caved in, one trembling hand, reaching out fingers grasping at nothing. Silence fell. Only the torch flames crackled, and the Tsar's ragged breathing tore through the heavy air. Ivan staggered back, staring down at the ruin he had made. His son's body twitched once, then lay still. Blood pooled across the cold stone, seeping into the joints between tiles, smelling of iron and ending. No, Ivan whispered, falling to his knees beside him. His hands hovered above the crushed head fingers, shaking. No, 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 no. He pressed his hands against the wound, as if to hold life in, but blood pumped between his fingers, hot and slick, dripping onto his beard. His robes the iron staff that now lay beside them. Tears coursed down his face, mingling with his son's blood, painting his cheeks with horror. Forgive me, he wept, rocking back and forth, cradling the broken skull against his chest. My son, my son, my light, my joy. Forgive me. Outside, the wolves howled again, their voices rising in cold triumph. The torches guttered in unseen drafts, shadows twisting along frescoed walls where saints averted their painted eyes. The chamber reeked of blood and hot tears. The staff lay across the tiles, gleaming in the dim torchlight, its silver bands smeared red. It had served its Tsar well, as scepter, as weapon, as executioner. In that silence, a single drop of blood slipped from Ivan's trembling fingertip, splashing onto the stone, with a quiet finality that would echo through Russian history forever. For in that single savage moment, he had shattered more than his son's skull. He had shattered Russia's future. He had shattered himself. The halls of the Kremlin fell into a hush so deep, it felt as though the stones themselves held their breath. Courtiers walked with heads bowed, their footsteps muffled against worn carpets, afraid that the echo of a heel might summon the Tsar's gaze. For after the prince's death, Ivan's eyes became a void. No soul dared enter. Winter deepened outside the Moscow River, frozen so solid that horses and carts crossed it as if upon glass. But inside Ivan's palaces, cold came from another realm, a chill of spirit that seeped into tapestries and icons alike. Servants whispered that frost bloomed upon his chamber walls, though fires roared in every grate. Ivan wandered through his silent rooms at night, the iron staff clutched loosely in his fingers, its tip scraping across polished stone floors with a metallic sigh. His robes lined with sable and fox whispered behind him like a funeral procession. Where he walked, torch flames flickered and dimmed as if his passing devoured light itself. Sometimes guards heard him speaking in low, broken tones. "My son, my Tsarevich, where are you hiding now?" Other nights he screamed in a voice ragged with blood. "Show yourself. Show me what you have become." In those hours between moon and dawn, servants swore they saw him kneeling in the throne room, the massive carved seat looming above him, like an idol to a god who refused to listen. He pressed his forehead to the frozen tiles, weeping into the floor where his son once walked, tears pooling around his beard. He slept little. When sleep came, it dragged him into visions of horror. He saw his son's skull split open anew beneath his staff blood, spraying in slow, silent arcs across cathedral walls. He saw the boy rise, eyes glowing with moonlight, flesh blackened with rot, mouth split into a rictus of sorrow. "Father," the corpse whispered, "why have you forsaken me?" Ivan would wake screaming, clutching the iron staff to his chest like a crucifix heart slamming against his ribs with such violence he thought it might split open. Sweat froze upon his skin, leaving him shaking and slick with fear as the candle's glow burned low. By day his mind rotted further. He ordered guards to scour the city for whispers of treason. Boyars vanished into dungeons where screams curdled the damp air. Priests were dragged before him to pray away demons that had burrowed too deep for prayer to reach. In every reflection, the polished gold of icons, the black gleam of water, jugs the rippling silver of ceremonial plates. He saw his son's eyes watching him, eyes wide with confusion, eyes wide with forgiveness, eyes wide with death. He spent hours alone in the cathedral, standing before icons of Christ Pantocrator and the Virgin Hodegetria, his lips moving in silent prayers that never reached heaven. Monks smelled blood on his robes as they passed, eyes lowered to the cold marble, lest they meet his gaze and be swallowed whole. One evening he entered the prince's abandoned chambers. The air still smelled faintly of pine soap and waxed leather. A half-finished psalter lay open on a carved oak lectern, illuminated letters glowing in lamplight. Ivan ran trembling fingers across the pages, smudging pigments that would now never be completed. He sank onto the prince's bed, burying his face in furs still haunted by his son's scent. For hours he sat there, rocking back and forth, iron staff clutched across his knees. Servants listening beyond the door heard low murmurs through the keyhole. "Forgive me. Please. Come back. Take the throne if you wish. Take it. Just come back." But only silence answered. Silence and the faint creak of rafters shifting under the weight of winter's ice. That night, Ivan ordered a feast. Boyars were summoned to the candlelit hall's tables heavy with roasted goose carp in aspic rye cakes, glazed with honey-boiled elk, and steaming pots of kasha. Minstrels played trembling melodies on domras, their eyes darting from one another with desperate confusion. Ivan sat at the headrobes dark as night, the iron staff leaning against his chair. His eyes flickered between the flickering flames and the empty space beside him, the seat reserved for his son, draped now in black velvet. He raised a goblet of blood-red wine, his fingers trembling so violently the liquid spilled onto the tablecloth, blooming like a wound upon white linen. To the Tsarevich he whispered, voice cracking in the hush, "To my son, may God keep him in his mercy." No one dared respond. The hall fell silent, but for the hiss of fat dripping from roasting spits, the crackle of pine logs in the great hearth. Ivan drained the goblet in one shaking draught wine, spilling down his beard, staining his robes with darkness. When he lowered the cup, tears coursed down his hollow cheeks. In their glistening trails, torchlight caught a reflection behind his eyes, as though deep within his son still gazed out, silent, waiting, unforgiving. Outside, the wolves howled. The palace trembled with their distant grief. And within its tallest tower, the throne of Russia sat beneath candlelight, no longer a seat of power, but a haunted altar to a son's blood and a father's unending madness. Spring arrived in Moscow with the slow dripping of thaw icicles weeping onto palace stones, rivers cracking under the weight of their own liberation. But within the Kremlin, no thaw came. Winter's cold remained rooted in Ivan's chambers in his veins, in the silent eyes of every servant who passed beneath his gaze. The Tsarevich's body was buried quietly beneath frozen earth, outside cathedral walls, without the rites due a prince, without the chants of mourning choirs. The Tsar forbade it. No bell tolled for him. No candles burned in the cathedral for his soul. His grave bore no name, only a simple wooden cross driven into damp soil, unmarked anonymous among paupers and criminals. For in killing him, Ivan had erased him. But Russia remembered. Whispers spread through Moscow's alleys and distant wooden villages borne on smoky hearth-winds, and passed between trembling lips in candlelit huts. Mothers whispered the story to their sons as warning. Never raise your head, too high, before power. Old men told it to each other in secret, shaking their heads over black bread and weak kvass. He killed the future with his own hands. In the throne room, Ivan sat hour after hour upon his gilded seat robes, pooling around his thin legs like dark water. The iron staff rested across his lap, its notched silver bands worn smooth by his trembling grip. He no longer looked at the boyars who came to kneel before him with petitions and bribes. His eyes stayed fixed upon a place beyond them, beyond the hall, beyond the walls, upon a figure only he could see. At times a smile twitched across his cracked lips, as if he saw something tender in that ghostly vision. Other times, tears spilled down his cheeks unchecked, dripping into his beard, staining his embroidered collar with salt. They said that on windless nights servants heard him weeping in his chamber, his sobs echoing against painted icons and carved wooden beams. "My son," he whispered into the dark, "my Tsarevich. Come back. Take it all. Take everything. Just come back." But no one came. Only silence answered. Silence and the scuttle of mice along rafters blackened with age. His body grew frail, twisted by fevers and black rages. His gums bled so often that his teeth loosened, and his breath stank of rot and metal. His legs swelled with unspent humors, purple and streaked with angry sores that no physician could soothe. Boils bloomed across his thighs, bursting to stain his robes with yellow pus and blood. The scent of him grew so sour and rank that servants gagged when forced to change his furs. Still he clung to the iron staff as if its cold weight could anchor him to life. When he could no longer walk unaided, he had it lashed to his arm with leather straps, refusing to release it even in sleep. In his final weeks, Ivan ordered the construction of a new cathedral, a monument to his own repentance, though no stone was ever laid. He designed it in visions fevered and incoherent towers like flayed bones, domes black as plague, Boyle's icons painted only in shades of red and ash. Build it where his blood fell, he commanded architects with shaking fingers. Build it so high that God himself will have no choice but to hear my sorrow. But when they asked which son, he meant he struck them silent with his staff. On his last morning, Ivan lay upon his furs, sweat soaking his beard, iron staff clasped against his ribs. Priests chanted psalms beside his bed, their eyes lowered voices trembling with each prayer's final syllable. Outside, spring birds sang in the palace gardens, their trills piercing the dawn with joy he could no longer understand. His breath came in short, ragged bursts. Each exhale rattled in his chest like bones shaken in a beggar's cup. He raised a trembling hand, fingers stained with old blood, and reached toward something only he saw, a figure standing in the shadows beyond the priests, silent, radiant with a light no candle could mimic. "My son," he croaked, tears leaking down his temples into gray-streaked hair. "Forgive me. Forgive." His hand dropped. The staff clattered to the floor, its iron tip ringing against stone, like the final toll of a funeral bell. His eyes remained open, staring at the ghost who never came to take his place. Russia buried Ivan the Terrible with every right denied to his son. Bells thundered for him. Monks chanted for him. Thousands wept as his coffin passed, draped in black velvet and gold-threaded prayers. Yet even as they mourned their Tsar, they whispered of the boy he killed. The prince erased from icons, erased from chronicles, but not from memory. For though Ivan's tomb bears his name in gilt and marble, it is his son's unmarked grave that lives on in Russia's soul. A silent monument to a power so mad, so terrified of mortality, it murdered its only hope to feed its own dying flame. And thus ends the story of Ivan the Terrible the Tsar, who built cathedrals that reached for heaven, conquered lands beyond the horizon, and crowned himself God's chosen emperor, yet could not abide the thought that after him, another would sit upon his throne. All power crumbles at the edge of the grave, and all madness, no matter how crowned, ends with the same silence.